Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm Katie Simpson in Ottawa. Extreme temperatures and high winds fuel wildfires across the country.
The wildfire situation in New Brunswick has gotten worse.
Mother Nature continues not to cooperate with us.
Wildfires are burning out of control in Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick. We'll ask the Federal Emergency Management Minister what more can be done to help. And a Republican congressman speaking out against Donald Trump's trade war. Coming up, Representative Don Bacon gives us new insight into the problems Trump's tariffs are causing. Plus,
this is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back.
the U.S. president declares a state of emergency over violent crime in Washington, D.C., attempting to seize control of local police, ordering National Guard troops into the streets. Why this plan is being broadly condemned. Power and Politics starts right now. We start with the wildfires burning across the country. There are 3 burning out of control in New Brunswick. Premier Susan Holt is warning there isn't any reprieve coming in the forecast.
We know that the hot, humid, windy weather is going to continue for the foreseeable future. It was hotter today. I think Bathurst recorded higher temperatures than we've seen in some parts of Florida. So we need to take all possible precautions to avoid the spread of the existing fires or the starting of new fires.
The province's Natural Resources Minister says an additional 30 firefighters from Nova Scotia and PEI will be arriving, and some additional help from the state of Maine. There are 5 wildfires burning out of control in Newfoundland and Labrador, including a new, rapidly growing wildfire that Premier John Hogan said could cause power interruptions. He also said the Canadian Armed Forces is deploying 80 firefighters. Eleanor Olszewski is the Minister of Emergency Management and Community Resilience. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to start with, can you bring us up to speed on what the federal government is doing to assist right now with the raging out-of-control wildfires?
Absolutely, Katie. And let me start off by thanking you very much for having me on the program today. And I would also like to just take a minute to thank the Canadian Armed Forces, first responders, firefighters, everyone that's been actively involved in fighting these terrible wildfires over the last number of weeks and often putting their own lives at risk. It is so very much appreciated.
And so in terms of the federal assistance that is taking place right now, can you bring us up to speed on what that looks like?
I surely can, Katie. We are monitoring the situation all across the country, and I can tell you that we have had active requests for federal assistance from the provinces of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And our government, our officials, and also myself in my capacity as Minister of Emergency Management, we're in constant contact with our provincial and territorial partners. We are checking with them to see what their needs are, and we are ready to assist whenever we're called upon to do so. And so in the province of Manitoba, the request for assistance was with respect to really more humanitarian support. And so that was things like shelter, food and water, and transportation. That's the recent request. In Saskatchewan, we have armed forces personnel helping actively with fighting fires, and we also supplied helicopters. And with respect to Newfoundland, we have deployed the Canadian Armed Forces as well as the Coast Guard, and a number of other partners are being mobilized to help, not just with evacuations, but with firefighting and with delivery of services as well. So really, Katie, our top priority, not just in these jurisdictions, but across the country, is to make sure that Canadians are kept safe.
So those are requests in this moment from 3 different provinces. They're all very different requests. I'm very curious, even though it's not new for the federal government to step in and assist with this, is this really the new normal?
I think what we're seeing, Katie, really because of the effects of climate change, drought, hot, dry conditions on the ground, what we're seeing is this likely is the new normal, that there will continue to be devastating wildfires across the country. And I think it's going to be really important for us to invest in making our communities more resilient. And that's one of the things that Prime Minister Carney actually was focused on when he added community resilience to my portfolio. So, you know, Katie, right now the focus is on evacuating people, firefighting, keeping people and keeping families and their homes safe. But we will also be looking at when it's time to build back these communities, we'll be supporting them and we'll be assisting them in building back better. And that means building, for example, with using fire-resistant materials and making sure that we take other steps to proactively make sure that we reduce the risk of wildfires.
When you talk about the community resilience aspect of your portfolio, I'm curious, I know that this government is very new, but when you look at other countries that are dealing with similar challenges when it comes to extreme weather and wildfire seasons, is there another place that's doing something right that Canada could learn from?
I think, Katie, we can always learn from other jurisdictions. Like, no matter what the circumstance, we can always learn. Circumstances are different from place to place. Circumstances are different depending on fire behavior, on the resources that you have at your disposal. So certainly I'm always open to learning what we can from other jurisdictions. I have to say, though, that there are a number of provinces across Canada that have robust firefighting systems in place already, such as Alberta, such as British Columbia. And really in our country, what we find is there are some other jurisdictions like Saskatchewan and Manitoba that aren't as adequately resourced as other provinces. And so, you know, one of the things that I'm looking at is what we can do to make sure that in our role as coordinators of the federal emergency response, that we don't leave any stones unturned and we see what we can do to improve the coordination at a federal level, particularly for jurisdictions that struggle more than others, and also particularly for communities in remote areas. And you'll know there were a lot of issues with respect to evacuation of First Nations peoples because they lived in remote areas in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. It was very difficult to evacuate from those communities. And so, you know, I'm just really pleased. One of the things that we've done really well, I think, is evacuate a large number of people without loss of life or limb. And for that, I'm particularly grateful.
Do you see it as a federal government responsibility to ensure that some provinces that might not have the resources they need versus other provinces, is it the federal government's job to step in and maybe top up those resources so perhaps those provinces that might not be as equipped and ready for wildfire season are ready to go?
Yes, Katie, and it's a good point. It's actually exactly the way emergency management works at the present time. And so once the resources of the province or territory are exhausted, it's at that point that they call on the federal government for help. And so we can provide that help, you know, in the middle of a situation, as we have been doing, but we also need to assist communities in working on the resilience piece so that when next year's wildfire season comes along, you know, our communities are a lot better equipped to handle those situations.
The last thing I want to ask you about is an issue that has sort of come up across the Canada-U.S. border. As you are aware, some American lawmakers have sent letters or complained to Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, saying that wildfire smoke from Canada has come across the border and that it's ruined some summers in, you know, communities in the United States. I'm wondering what you think of those complaints and what's your message to those American lawmakers?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. wildfires are a global problem. And in fact, there are wildfires in California and many parts of the United States at the present time. We'll expect to see smoke coming across our border from their fires. And what it really tells us is that collaboration and cooperation between countries that border on one another is particularly important. And I'm really happy to say that the United States, together with Canada, signed on to the Kananaskis Wildfire Accord. And that's just an example of cooperation between the United States and our country in an effort to better deal with wildfires. And, the other thing I would add to that, is I don't want to get too caught up in the smoke aspect, firefighting is actually an area where we've had incredibly good cross-border cooperation with the United States. United States has sent firefighters to Canada. There are American firefighters here at the present time. And of course, Canada's done the same with respect to wildfires in the United States. So, contrary to, to what the letters alluded to, there's actually incredible cooperation between the jurisdictions. And as I say, it's just an example of how wildfires are a global concern and they need international cooperation.
Minister Olszewski, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Katie.
U.S. President Donald Trump says his global tariffs are boosting the American economy, but a Republican congressman sees them causing a lot of pain in his state in Nebraska. We'll hear from him, Don Bacon, next. Dozens of countries around the world are now subject to U.S. President Donald Trump's latest round of tariffs. While countries like Canada say they're working to negotiate better trade deals with the U.S. president, Trump is doubling down on the use of tariffs as a way to boost the U.S. economy.
1 year ago, they said your country was dead, and now you have the hottest country anywhere in the world. We do. We have the hottest country in the world right now. The tariffs have helped. It's given us not only the money, it's billions, trillions of dollars of money, but it gives us great power over enemies.
But not all Republicans agree, including Representative Don Bacon, who represents a district in Nebraska. He joins us now. You in the past have spoken out against tariffs targeting Canada. You've watched this trade war unfold. From your perspective, how would you describe the Canada-U.S. relationship in this moment?
Unfortunately, it's in a rocky spot, but it shouldn't be. United States and Canada have been friends for, a century plus. We've had a great undefended border, and we've had a great relationship together. We've had a great trade relationship. And by the way, our trade relationship is quite equitable. Canada may have a little advantage on exports. We have an advantage in services. We also have a great tourism industry. So it's been a win-win relationship between us. And I hate to see this trade, the tariffs that the president's put on Canada poison the water, and it has. I've also all the talk about Canada's being a 51st state, and the governor, Governor Trudeau, and all those kinds of conversations that's come out of the White House has hurt her standing in Canada, and that's a shame. And for what purpose? I don't see where it's an advantage to America or Canada. We built on a tight relationship, and it's a win-win relationship. And when we hurt each other, nobody comes out ahead on this. So I have not supported the president when it comes to tariffs on Canada, or just the tone that he's had towards our northern neighbor. And we have a chance to build on USMCA. Both sides have lived up to the agreement, and we should build on it. Where there's been seams, we can fix that and improve the trade relationship even further.
How are the tariffs on Canada, how are they affecting people who live in your state of Nebraska?
Well, it's a mix between the tariffs, but also just some anger that we've seen towards from Canadians towards America on the 51st state types of talk. I've seen some of our companies in Omaha state that they've lost some customers from Canada, and we understand that, but it's not the company's fault doing this. But we understand that there's some anger right now. We're seeing it. So there's been lost contracts. We've seen some loss in trade. We've seen some loss in tourism. And again, for what reason? I don't see where it has benefited America at all. And we've had a great trade relationship. We should build on it.
So I've asked about this. So I'm normally a reporter who's based in Washington, and we try to speak with American lawmakers on a regular basis. You're one of the first I've spoken to who seems to understand the anger that is sort of radiating out of Canada. I'm curious as to what you've noticed and how you sort of have seen that sort of play out in your state.
Well, our companies give me this feedback from Omaha. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And, Canada and America has a very integrated manufacturing, and we have a very integrated economy. So when one side is angry at the other and they're stopping contracts or not renewing contracts, loss of tourism, we feel it on our side. And again, I would just say to the White House, for what purpose? I believe in free trade. Free trade provides the best merchandise, the best product at the best price in the most efficient manner possible. And when we do a free trade that's fair, both sides benefit. And that's what Canada and the United States has had over the many decades. And I, for the life of me, don't know what the president or the White House sees in benefit in, degrading or insulting our neighbor. It doesn't gain us anything. It surely doesn't gain Canada anything. It hurts our economic relationship. And I don't see a single purpose being filled here.
As someone who watches this very closely, is there anything, if you were to give the Canadian government advice on how to be dealing with Donald Trump and trying to navigate this tariff war, what advice would you give to the Canadian side in this moment?
Well, far be it for me to advise our Canadian friends on this. I feel better advising my own side. I think we should try to renew USMCA and make it even better. There's a few seams in there that we could fill in, and that would be where my focus area would be at. I think it should be a win-win relationship. It should be a fair relationship. It has been. And I think it would be fair to point out to our side that there's been a slight advantage, yes, in exports for Canada, but America has had an advantage in services, and in tourism, it's about the same. So this has been a equitable, fair relationship. I do think the one area that our White House brings up that would be something worth to consider on the Canadian side is defense spending. America spends 2.9% of our GDP on defense now. It's going to go up to 4% this year. We got to sustain that. And that is an area that we know that America can't shoulder that alone. Russia is clearly a threat, the way they're treating Ukraine. China is becoming equal to ours in the economy and in defense spending, a threat to Taiwan. We have other threats like Iran and terrorism still. So this is going to have to be the free world working together there. So if I could ask our Canadian friends to do anything, would be reflect on what they could do for defense spending. But I think beyond that, we've had a very equitable, fair, and a friendly relationship that we want to protect and build on.
Since the change in government, Prime Minister Mark Carney has tried to, at least in terms of the announcements that he's made and some of what we've heard about what's been going on with trade talks, there have been increased commitments to meet NATO spending goals. But again, Canada has to actually follow through and get there and then present it to the White House to say, hey, you know, this concern that it's not just the Trump administration that's had this concern. This has been a concern about Canada's military spending way back. So this is not necessarily a new concern, but in this moment, it appears that the government is trying to address the concerns from the Trump White House. But you mentioned Russia there. I know that you have been critical of, in some cases, of how the United States has responded in terms, how the Trump administration has responded in terms of what's going on with the war in Ukraine. Before you go, I'm curious to ask you what you think of Donald Trump's meeting in Alaska on Friday and you know, what your concerns are and what you're hoping comes out of it.
Well, we have some concerns because the president's been unpredictable when it comes to Russia. I think he's been very good with Iran. I think he's been good with China. But for some reason with Russia, he's hit and miss. I don't understand why, because it's clear to me, it's clear to 80% of the people out there that Putin's a bad guy. He's killed his adversaries. You know, Russia's changed their borders 9 times using force since 1991. And the invasion of Ukraine is the worst, but it's the latest. They're not going to stop unless the free world stands up to Putin and stops this. And it's in our national security interest that Ukraine prevails, because if Ukraine goes down, you got Moldova, you got Azerbaijan, Georgia, maybe the Baltics. You got to stop the schoolyard bully in the process, because otherwise they'll keep coming back at you. And the president has been hit and miss on this. He's had a blind spot here. Lately, it's been sounding better, and I hope the tone that he's had the last month is the spirit that he goes to these negotiations with Putin in Alaska. But I'm not going to criticize yet or praise. I want to see the results coming out of this meeting. And Ukraine should not be demanded of giving away territory for peace. For one, you can't trust Putin. 2, you shouldn't reward an invader, right? You should not reward that bad behavior. And so we got to stand by Ukraine's side here. They're the victim. And if Ukraine ever has to give up any territory to give peace, then they should have security guarantees with the United States and other NATO countries, and so that Russia knows they cannot just renew this war and do it again next year.
All right, Representative Don Bacon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
U.S. President Donald Trump is taking an unprecedented and controversial step in order to, he says, crack down on crime in Washington. Trump is putting the city's police under federal control, and he's deploying the National Guard.
Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. It's becoming a situation of complete and total lawlessness. And we're getting rid of the slums, too. We have slums here. We're getting rid of them. I know it's not politically correct. You'll say, oh, so terrible. No, we're getting rid of the slums.
CBC's Lisa Shing joins us now from Washington. Lisa, just walk us through how significant this is.
Hey there, Katie. Yeah, this is an extraordinary move, as you said, but perhaps not shocking because U.S. President Donald Trump has made wielding presidential powers in ways that have little precedent in modern U.S. history before. It also breaks with political norms. So it's not surprising what he's doing here because we've seen some of the moves he's made in the past in this second term. Now, today, Trump, in a press conference, called this Liberation Day in D.C., saying that the D.C. Metropolitan Police will now be under the purview of federal authorities, reporting directly to Attorney General Pam Bondi. He also said in this press conference, using strong language, that the city is dirty and disgusting and that violent crime is spiraling. So in order to combat that, he's deploying a number of officials, 800 this week, roughly, from a variety of federal agencies, including the FBI, the U.S. Park Police, as well as the National Guard, in order to patrol and for enforcement efforts. And possibly as well, more to come. And he also notably didn't rule out using and bringing in the military either. And he's able to do all of this by declaring a public safety emergency.
The police are standing, and they're told, don't do anything under any search. So and you can see they want to get at it. And they're standing there, and people are spitting in their face, and they're not allowed to do anything. But now they are allowed to do whatever the hell they want.
And so Trump also today alluded to the fact that he wanted to move homeless people out of the city, although there wasn't a lot of detail on where exactly he would move them or how exactly it would work, Katie.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of criticism around this, certainly because I live in Washington, D.C. I'm normally based in Washington, D.C. Crime is a challenge like all major American cities. But over the last couple of years, the numbers have actually been going down. Things have been moving in the right direction, despite what Donald Trump stood and said there. So I'm wondering, this is drawing a lot of criticism. What are you hearing?
It is drawing a lot of criticism, and as you know very well, Katie, that crime is a partisan issue here in the U.S., and so Republicans have a tough on-crime stance. Donald Trump certainly of that ilk as well. And he has expressed multiple times before his issues with crime in D.C. specifically. And so this announcement comes after a prominent former staffer with DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, was attacked in an apparent carjacking last week. And so he mused about bringing in federal officials at that time. And we saw a bit of evidence of that over the weekend with federal FBI agents patrolling the streets then. And as you mentioned, the statistics, though, paint a little bit of a different picture. While crime is an issue in various parts of the city, the overall statistics, according to the Department of Justice, show that in 2024, violent crime hit a 30-year low. So because of that, it's drawing a lot of criticism. A lot of Democrats are coming out and saying that this is an overstep, including D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who had a press conference today.
And while this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised. We know that access to our democracy is tenuous. That is why you have heard me and many Washingtonians before me advocate for full statehood for the District of Columbia.
So Bowser is alluding to the fact that Donald Trump actually has a little bit more authority here in the District of Columbia, and that's because it does not have a state government. So Congress essentially has a lot of say over what exactly happens here, over local issues. And so you hear Bowser there saying that they've been advocating for statehood in order to give a little more power back to local officials. We're also, that criticism I mentioned, we're seeing all of this in the wake of just several months after Trump sending the National Guard to LA to quell immigration protests there. And that's going through a court case as we speak too. But in DC, a little bit different because there's more federal authority able to be exercised here. And so this week, starting this week, we will be seeing more federal agents on the streets patrolling here.
Yeah, and you know what? Every time Donald Trump talks about Canada becoming the 51st state and how everyone in Canada hates it, you know who wants to become the 51st state? The people of Washington, D.C., so they can actually have voting representation within the American Congress. But I will be quiet now because I am a reporter based in D.C. This is normally what I cover. So Lisa, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Turning now to the situation in the Middle East, calls are growing more urgent for an independent investigation into the targeted killing of a prominent Al Jazeera journalist and his crew in Gaza City. The bodies of the dead journalists were carried into the hospital after the attack. Israel has confirmed they targeted Anas al-Sharif, one of the most well-known correspondents for Al Jazeera in Gaza. Israeli authorities claim al-Sharif served as the head of a terrorist cell in Hamas. It is an allegation the news organization and several journalist advocacy groups deny, saying there has not been adequate evidence presented to make that argument. Al Jazeera says al-Sharif was targeted for his coverage of the dire and dangerous conditions on the ground in Gaza. The Committee to Protect Journalists says 192 journalists have been killed since the start of Israel's military offensive in Gaza in October 2023. Jody Ginsburg is the CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you very much for speaking with us. I want to start by asking you, when you heard that Anas al-Sharif had been killed, what went through your mind?
I actually felt sick at the pit of my stomach. We had warned 2 weeks ago in a statement that we put out that Anas's life was in danger. We believed it to be in danger because he was smeared as a terrorist by an Israeli military spokesperson who provided no evidence of the accusation. And we believe that this was a precursor to his murder, and that proved to be true.
So even though those warnings were put out and it was something that had been flagged by your organization and by other organizations, you know, how is it that we are in the situation we're in right now?
We're in this situation because Israel is able to act with impunity. Since the start of the war, 192 journalists have been killed, and 184 of those are Palestinian journalists killed by Israel. We believe at least 26 of those were deliberate targetings. We've seen a number of cases, as we saw in yesterday's killings, where Israel has accused, without providing credible evidence, journalists of being terrorists. But in this case, it's not just Anas who has been killed, it's the entire Al Jazeera Gaza City news crew. And Israel has offered no explanation for why it thought fit to kill not just someone it suspected of terrorism, but other journalists who were all working together in a tent that was housing journalists.
That was going to be my next question. So your organization adamantly rejects the allegations that Israel has put forward. It says that al-Sharif was an active member of Hamas. Your organization denies that allegation, as does Al Jazeera. But there were 4 other members of the Al Jazeera news crew that were also killed. Had there been other allegations about them?
Not to our knowledge, and Israel certainly had said nothing. And to be clear, what we have said repeatedly is we have seen no credible evidence produced by Israel that substantiates its claim that Anas al-Sharif was a terrorist. It provided some documents today which it alleged demonstrated that he was an active militant combatant, but many experts have suggested that those are simply not credible. We've seen them used, these kinds of documents used in previous killings, and the same things have been said in those too. But in the case of the other journalists, as you mentioned, no credible reason has been offered for why those journalists were killed. And of course, it's important to remember that in war, there is the concept of proportionality, but it's also important and absolutely crucial to recognise that journalists are civilians. They must never be targeted in war, and to do so is a war crime.
What do you want to see happen next?
We would like to see governments, international governments, take much more seriously and take much greater action against Israel for flouting international humanitarian law. To date, since the start of the war, we've seen very little in the way of condemnation of journalist killings from the international community. We were pleased to see Germany today at least calling for explanation from Israel as to why it killed all of these journalists, wiped out an entire news crew. But we also need to see action. We need to start to see bodies like the European Union reconsider its trade agreements with Israel, reconsider its willingness to supply weapons if those weapons are not being used according to the rules of international warfare.
There is a statement that is just out from a Canadian government Twitter account from Foreign Policy Canada. It's condemning the killing of the Al Jazeera journalists in Gaza, calling for accountability, full accountability, and the protection of media everywhere. But I'm curious, you talked specifically about the European Union. Is there anything you want to see specifically from Canada, given that this is a show for a Canadian audience?
Well, with any government, we would like to see these warm words. We've had great support from Canada for press freedom globally in recent years. It's been a lead coordinator of the Media Freedom Coalition, but we need to see Canada ensure that Israel is taking accountability and make sure that it is meeting its requirements to do so, to carry out investigations and to hold those responsible accountable. It's not simply good enough just to talk about it.
This has been a concern before the killing of these journalists in this moment. I'm wondering, from your assessment, what do you make of how the international community has responded to these threats, specifically in Gaza, when it comes to the targeting of journalists?
Well, frankly, the response of the international community has been weak at best, silent at worst, and that has created this environment of impunity in which so many journalists can be killed and their killers go unpunished. As I said, it is quite brazen. Israel admitted targeting Anas al-Sharif and therefore killing those other journalists, but it has offered no explanation thus far under what circumstances it thought fit to kill journalists whom it presumably did not consider to be terrorists. And unfortunately, Gazan journalists, the only journalists who are able to report from the territory, because no international media is allowed in, have paid the ultimate price in the last 2 years.
The last question I want to ask you, Jody, is do you think there can or will be an independent investigation into what's happened?
At the moment, I have very little faith that there will be. This is a pattern we've seen from Israel, not just in the current war, but over the past 2 decades, in which journalists have been killed. There have been either paltry investigations or no investigations at all, and no one has ever been held accountable. So I hold out very little hope that Israel will carry out such a process, but I do hope that we will see something from the international community through the international courts and through universal jurisdiction.
All right, Jody Ginsberg, CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll have more Power and Politics right after this break.
even with Donald Trump, without Donald Trump, it doesn't look like he'll be a reliable partner for much longer.
Rob, what do you make of this moment that Canada is in, and how much more sort of political latitude will Canadians be giving Mark Carney for as long as this stretches on?
Well, if you look at the data, it appears that he continues to have the backing of Canadians who are still outraged, furious, and on their hind legs. That being said, there is some method. I agree with Lisa. I think that the sort of casual nature of Canada's response right up until now belies the fact that they tried to get a deal. We had a prime minister who set a July 21st deadline for a deal, and then an August 1st deadline. It's come and gone. They spent a lot of time in Washington, as you know, trying to get a deal. So I'm sure they would prefer a deal. That being said, here are the criterion that the Europeans had to face that we don't have to face. Europeans are basically saying we need a deal now because we've got nothing. 15% is better than 35%. And in the interim, we've got the midterm elections in a little bit more than a year. After that, if worse comes to worse, we also have court cases making their way through, so maybe we'll get relief from that. Canada doesn't need that. Canada has this deal for now. They don't have to sit around and wait for court cases or the midterms. But you know that's no guarantee. We have the sort of advisory period that begins this fall on CUSMA. And I have to say something about Congressman Bacon. He's a fascinating figure.
He is.
And I'll tell you why. He's one of those rare Republicans who actually had to be sanctioned by his own party, urged by his own party. I'll use a different term. He was urged to stop kneeing Donald Trump in the nether regions by Republicans because of his disagreement on trade. He's got pork producers in his state. Those pork producers depend on young pigs coming down from Canada and then working their way through the system in the United States, being processed down there. So this is a rare guy, also rare because he's in a district that was won by Kamala Harris. So he's a blue dot Republican in a way. There was a blue dot on his riding or on his district. Really, really interesting. So a guy who defied Donald Trump, not going to be able to run again because he feared a challenge, and concerned about bringing home the Canadian bacon, as they say.
As very specifically, as they say. The other issue I want to talk to all of y'all about today is with what is going on with Russia and Ukraine. Donald Trump made some pretty intense comments. I don't know how to describe them. Made comments that, we haven't traditionally heard an American president speak like this, but I know that we always say that about Trump. But we want to play a little bit. I believe we have a little bit of what Donald Trump said today about the talks that are going to happen on Friday. Donald Trump is going to Alaska. He's going to meet with Vladimir Putin. And here is sort of the stage he's setting for what should be expected. Have a listen.
There'll be some swapping. There'll be some changes in land, and the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine.
Now, today, Mark Carney and Ukrainian Prime Minister Volodymyr Zelensky, they spoke on the phone about those upcoming negotiations and Canada's commitment to peace in Ukraine, with Zelensky saying, "Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Canada, for your support and readiness together for a lasting peace." Now, all of that being said, and we also believe Prime Minister Mark Carney, we also spoke with Keir Starmer about this today. So this is clearly a pressing concern right now. Lisa, I'm curious, what do you think Canada, is there anything Canada can do in this moment ahead of these talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump?
Other than making sure that Yukon is protected from these land changes that are going to happen in Alaska this weekend, no. I think that we're fine in just watching from the outside. From what I can surmise, this is a situation where Donald Trump feels he needs to interfere or to intercede in order to try to get a deal for Russia, it would appear, not for Ukraine. And as a result, it may just be a meeting that runs its course. He can't get a deal. He pronounces that he tried to get a deal and he couldn't get a deal. And then they move on from there. But I can't read into too much other than to say it's very surprising that Vladimir Putin's agreeing to go to the United States. It must be some concern that this war continues to drag on in that part of the world. And he wants to see some kind of conclusion to it. And he's asking his friend, Donald Trump, to help him out.
Vandana, you were an advisor for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You know, in this moment, if you were still in your role working in Prime Minister Mark Carney's government, you know, what do you think the conversations behind the scenes would be around this, even if Canada's not sort of playing a direct role?
It would be, I think you're seeing a stronger positioning of Canada to Europe, and you're seeing a trifecta of London, of France, of Canada coming together more and more often. I think because our values aligned and how we want to, you know, how we want to share ourselves in the international community. And I think all that Canada can do is continue to echo what the European Union says, to stand strong with them and with Ukraine. I mean, it's unfortunate to see this. I think Ukraine should be at the table, but, you know, who knows what will happen? We'll have to see on Friday. But I think if I was advising the Prime Minister right now, it would be to continue to talk to our allies, to stand strong with Ukraine as much as possible, and to do our part in that. You know, I'm not sure how much leeway we have, but Europe with Canada can be a lot stronger than just Canada on its own.
And Rob, before you were the Canada correspondent for The Economist, before you were the boss here at CBC, you were also a Washington correspondent, a Washington bureau chief, if I am correct, for a very long time. I'm very keen for your perspective on when you look at the comments that Donald Trump is making and sort of the positioning around Russia. You know, what's your big picture takeaway? What do you think?
Well, I'm struck by that experience and by my experience of speaking to Europeans and telling European diplomats. And I can tell you that there is concern that the stout defenders of the terrified citizens of Foggy Bottom and Chevy Chase might not be able might not be a match for Vladimir Putin. There's a sense that he may, in effect, be lured into making concessions without the Ukrainians there, without the Europeans there. You know, the Europeans, this is their neighborhood. They're living in a neighborhood. They are actually terrified, unlike the denizens of Foggy Bottom and Chevy Chase. Canada does have something at stake. We have 300,000 Ukrainians who have come here. We've helped them settle here. Many of them are making lives here. We've given, I think, over $4 billion, either in loan guarantees or in direct aid to the Ukrainians. We have something at stake. We don't have influence, but we have to be very, very careful. And I think, as Lisa said, because when they start talking about territorial concessions, we also have a U.S. president who's interested in Canadian territory as well. And if that becomes the norm and the normal way of thinking, I think that Canadians should be alarmed about that as well.
Lisa, on that point that Rob has made, is the outrage and anger in Canada over those, you know, sort of Trump offhand, whether they're offhand comments or insults or whatever they may be from Trump, do you think that has Canadians in a heightened state of sort of awareness and alarm, even though the consensus here is so firmly against anything even remotely like that happening?
I think it's such a shock to the system, Katie, to be honest. Who would have thought that we'd be having this conversation of an American president saying that they want to come and take over Canada as the 51st state? It's ludicrous to say it out loud, but it's a reality that we're living with. And the problem is he's backing up his defense policy with it. He's backing up his economic policy with it. And it just seems to be something that he just simply doesn't let go. And it causes you to wonder, is he really serious about this? Does he truly believe that at the end of the day, he can economically force Canada into a situation where they have to become part of the United States? I say no, we're never going to get to that. But the reality is that Canadians are worried about it. And that's what gives, I think, a lot of wind in the sails to the current government.
And Vandana, I'll go last point to you here. You know, on that point, Canadians have aggressively said no. There is political unity on this issue, which is a rare thing in Canada. It's a rare thing in politics anywhere. But do you think it does continue to give that wind in the sails to the Carney government?
I think it's definitely been helpful. I think Mr. Carney's ability to even bring, and you mentioned politics, but premiers of all different stripes, of different ideologies coming together, they seem fairly united so far. I think does give the wind in the sails. I think Canadians, this is why they elected Mark Carney. I think they feel like he's an adult. He has the best interests at Canadians at heart, but he also wants seller values. And I think that's what they want from him. But he also is I think, transparent in what is happening. You know, he's already indicated that there are some tariffs that may stay, that it is difficult. He doesn't try to hide behind that. So I think there's trust in that right now, and it gives trust in this current government because it hasn't been focused on partisan politics. It's been focused on what's best for Canada, which I think ultimately that's what Canadians are looking for.
Okay, Rob, we have 1 minute left, or probably 45 seconds at this point. One last thing I want to ask you about is, I'm not sure if you caught Donald Trump's announcement today about sending in the National Guard to the United States or into Washington, D.C. I'm curious, as someone who was once a Washington bureau chief, what you just think about what we witnessed.
Yeah, I was there when the crime rate was was coming down at an alarming level, and at a great level, not an alarming level. It was wonderful. I rode the metro, the subway, the buses on a daily basis in Washington, D.C., and yes, there is crime in Washington. Yes, it needs to be tackled. But apparently, it's now as safe or safer than when I lived there some 20 years ago. So it's mysterious to me. I wonder if the mystery might be related to the fact that it's a Democratic city with no congressional representation.
And we'll have a conversation about that later. Okay, thank you very much, Power Panel. Thank you so much. We're running out of time. I'm Katie Simpson. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. We've got plenty more ahead on CBC News Network. Stay right there.